Hello, my name is Paul Henry, Security and Forensic Analyst at Lumension. Welcome to our Patch Tuesday update for March 2013. Well, no luck of the Irish for IT this St. Paddy's Day. IT admins can't seem to catch a break this year. First, we have the never-ending stream of Java issues that's kept folks on their toes since back in January. Now they've got another busy month of patches ahead of them, with 7 total patches from Microsoft, 4 of which are critical. However, once again, the issues outside of Microsoft, specifically Java, will likely eclipse this Patch Tuesday update. Now, looking at Microsoft in detail, your top priority is, of course, going to be MS 13021. This is a critical patch for IE addressing 9 CVEs. It's a culminative update for IE. Now, an interesting fact of note is that Microsoft released IE 10 for Windows 7 this past February, and IE 10 is actually not affected on that platform. However, the thing that really stands out here is that it does affect IE 10 on Windows 8, with some remote code execution vulnerability capability. Now, unfortunately, this represents the latest and greatest of Microsoft's coding, and we're already finding critical issues with it. Fortunately, none of these use after free issues are publicly being exploited. Use after free, of course, is an area where people are really focusing more attention on than they have in the past. However, I really want to emphasize that it's not the delivery mechanism that's the problem. The problem is not taking care of the end game. And of course, the end game is preventing unauthorized binaries from running on your machine in the first place. Now, MS 13022, that would be your second priority. It's a critical update for remote code execution issues in Silverlight 5. This browse and own attack is a pretty standard one where users might browse to a website that could contain malicious content. One important thing I really want to note here is that Silverlight 4 is no longer supported by Microsoft. Most users will be on Silverlight 5 already, since many common websites such as Netflix will automatically upgrade you. However, if you're still on the old version 4, you really want to consider upgrading and then, of course, installing this patch. Next, we have MS 13023. It's a critical remote code execution issue in Microsoft Visio Viewer. It's a pretty standard looking file type vulnerability issue. The attack vector for this would be receiving an email that contained a malicious Visio diagram. That, of course, would be useful in spear phishing attacks, but otherwise it's a pretty low key issue. The last of our critical updates is MS 13024. It's an elevation of privilege issue with SharePoint. Interestingly, only one of the 4 CVEs is critical. That elevation of privilege vulnerability, which looks eerily similar to typical cross-site scripting issues, would allow attackers to read or write into memory and tamper with content. The other CVEs are moderate class denial of service issues and 2 important elevation of privilege issues. MS 13025 is an important information disclosure vulnerability in OneNote. If you received a malicious OneNote file via email and you opened it, you might give the attacker a look at other currently open OneNote tabs. For heavy users of OneNote, there's likely to be a mix of personal and professional content in your files. Disclosure of some of that mix could be of concern to many users, especially if an attacker gained access to your configuration files. Next is MS 13026. It's an important issue for Outlook for the Mac. Essentially, it's a fingerprinting vulnerability. Email spammers are going to send a bunch of spam email to determine if your email address is in fact valid, which they could, of course, then use for other things. Fortunately, the only thing this vulnerability is going to do is disclose whether or not your email address is real. There are unfortunately no current mitigations for this, so Mac users really want to install this one quickly. Last but not least is MS 13027, which will actually be your third priority in patching this month. This has been ranked important by Microsoft because it requires physical access to pull it off. However, it's really a scary vulnerability. It's an elevation of privilege in kernel mode drivers. Normally, this sort of vulnerability would allow a low-level authorized user to escalate their privilege. However, this one is a little different. If your system is actively running and an infected USB stick is inserted, the kernel mode drivers for USB will actually load and mount the USB device before making the OS aware that a USB is available for use. The vulnerability here is the USB driver, so the infected driver is already loaded before the OS has really even used it. This could again give an attacker system-level memory access where they could get code execution at system level. Now, this is scarily similar to existing toolkits such as Inception. Now, Inception allows attackers direct memory access through a FireWire or Thunderbolt connection. Once an attack has access, the attacker can overwrite the location for the administrative credentials in RAM. Now, for both Inception and this vulnerability, the computer doesn't need to be logged on or even locked. Now, if Inception were to be updated for this vulnerability, an attacker could do a lot of damage to your machine. Physical access, of course, would be required, which is why Microsoft has rated it important. Nevertheless, we recommend you put this pretty high up on your priority list, right behind MS-13-021 and MS-13-022. Now, we're only 3 months into the year, and already we're seeing higher numbers of patches, particularly in critical patches. Last year at this time, Microsoft was averaging about 7 patches each Patch Tuesday, only 2 of which were critical. This year, Microsoft has so far averaged close to 9 patches, of which 4 are critical. To really put things in perspective, by March of 2011, Microsoft was averaging close to 6 patches with around 1 critical. So far, it looks like the number of vulnerabilities Microsoft is patching is in fact increasing, with critical vulnerabilities doubling year over year. We can only hope that this is due to a combination of new platforms and perhaps better discovery of vulnerabilities rather than actual ongoing security problems at Microsoft, whose track record has been typically very good, particularly when compared to companies like Apple. Java continues to be a problem. Java has been a problem for quite some time now and continues to rear its ugly head. More vulnerabilities are out in the wild, and Oracle really has its hands full keeping the platform patched and ready to go. If you haven't already updated, update to the latest version of Java immediately and uninstall any old stray versions you might have laying around. If you aren't using Java regularly, uninstall it or disable it. This will be one of the best ways to protect yourself as IT continues to wrestle with a more long-term solution to the Java problem. I also recommend taking a look at our Lumension blog, where I list some tips on how you can deal with the Java problem, just short of revamping your endpoint security strategy. I'll also be hosting a webinar right after Patch Tuesday tomorrow, March 13th, with my colleague Russ Ernest, and I'll be talking about understanding the ins and outs of the recent Java vulnerabilities and what you can really do about it to shore up your defenses. We'll discuss what the current Java vulnerabilities are, how they could affect your organization, and again, how you can limit your exposure without jumping on the ban Java bandwagon and going overboard. Check out the blog, check out the upcoming podcast. This has been our Patch Tuesday update for March 2013. Thank you for listening.